Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder with the Oklahoman's Dig Team. And in this week's episode, we're going to devote almost all of our conversation to the governor's race, the race for Oklahoma governor to replace Mary Fallin, who has reached term limits this year. An open seat has brought out quite a crowded field, at least on the Republican side, and the primaries are less than 4 months away. So here with me in the studio to talk about this, Justin Wingerter from our federal government desk, and then Chris Castile off from the road, probably logging more miles than anybody in the newsroom except for the Thunder beat writers. Chris Castile, who's been tracking, chasing, however you want to put it, the candidates for governor.
Almost 2,000 miles.
Yeah, well, welcome home,
Thanks.
Chris.
It's been fun.
Like I said, we've got quite a crowded field of candidates on the Republican side, so we'll start there, but there's a couple of candidates running as Libertarians and Democrats, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit. But I think right now a lot of the attention obviously is on the Republican field for a lot of reasons. One, this is probably going to be your likely front runner in such a Republican state. We're expecting there to be a runoff if none of the candidates are able to get that 50+1 percentage of the vote, then the top two will go on. Kind of give us a little bit of a rundown of what the field looks like right now. Who are our front runner candidates, do you feel like, based, I know there's been some polling, but just kind of based on your sense of the race, and then, what do those second and third tier candidates look like, and how's the race shaping up with just 4 months away?
Yeah, it's very active out there. I know a lot of people aren't paying attention right now, so a lot of these candidates are just speaking to very small groups or political groups, like a county GOP or a district GOP gathering. But there was one poll, and I think I think just kind of from a common sense standpoint, you have to put a couple of the people with elected experience, that now are office holders who have won elections as the front runners. That would be Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb, who's won 2 statewide elections. He will tell you that he's been in all 77 counties many times. Yeah. The other one that you have to automatically look to is the mayor of Oklahoma City, who's very, very well known in this media market, which extends well beyond Oklahoma City. That's Mick Cornett. We're talking Republicans here. And the third one that I think, he has a lot of money because he's matching every dollar that he raises with his own money. Is Tulsa businessman Kevin Stitt. There's a lot of buzz about him. He's a fresh face. There is another Tulsa person who's run before, Gary Richardson, an attorney, and he definitely has some people who like him, but he's a known quantity. He ran unsuccessfully as an independent in 2002. And the fifth one is also a state office holder, Gary Jones, who's currently the state auditor and inspector, and he was chairman of the Oklahoma Republican Party, and has a base really because of that, somewhat of a base. And there is a sixth candidate, or at least rumors of a sixth candidate, named Dan Fisher, who I actually just ran into at the state capitol yesterday. I've never met him before because he doesn't go to forums, and he's not out on the road like these other candidates. So that's the Republican side, and I would say, the top tier, as I see it now, is Lamb, Cornett, and Kevin Stitt. But there are only 2 places in that runoff, and it's going to be a dogfight for those 2 spots. It's going to, the ads have started somewhat, and they're all friendly bio, introduce yourself type ads, but that'll change. And on the Democratic side, Drew Edmondson, the former attorney general for 16 years, a state prosecutor before that. He's got good name recognition. He's also run before. And State Senator Connie Johnson. Drew Edmondson obviously has a ton of money compared to her, so he's in a good position, I think, to win that. And then there are a couple of I think there's actually 3 libertarians, but the 2 that I've seen the most are Rex Lawhorn and Chris Powell. Yeah. And of course that's they have their parties recognized. They'll have their own primary, but they will have a candidate in the general election.
Yeah. Well, like you said, at this point of the race, most of these candidates announced last year, and then, over the last couple of months, it's been, traveling across the state, kind of talking to these more engaged groups, trying to maybe kind of try to win the base. And so I imagine over the next several weeks, we're going to start to see, more television ads, more attention, and trying to appeal to that broader Republican base.
They'll be doing
network.
Both.
Yeah. Let's start with Lamb, because Lamb's interesting because for Lamb, a lot of voters right now are kind of frustrated with state government, and they're, with the budget fights that are happening in the legislature, and those are issues that the candidates are having to speak to a lot. out of all the candidates, Lamb is the most connected. I mean, granted, he's not a member of the legislature right now. He doesn't have this vote, but he's been a part of Fallon's cabinet. It's not anymore, but I mean, he's been in the Capitol. How much is he running on his experience at the Capitol, trying to run from it? What's that been like?
I think mostly he's trying to run from it, but you're absolutely right. It is in his DNA, state government. His father was a long-time state senator from Enid, Republican. Back when there were hardly any Republicans in the state legislature. I remember his father when I covered the state legislature 30 years ago, and so he grew up. It's part of his life is being a Republican, an Oklahoma Republican, and he was in the state Senate, and in fact, I believe was the first Republican Senate majority floor leader. When they first. So I mean, he's been in that building a lot. He worked for Frank Keating, the former Oklahoma Republican governor, for many years. So I mean, he's a very familiar face in the state capitol. It's very hard for him to talk about being not part of the problem. He does. Yeah. And he has a different kind of analogies that he uses. Whether it's like I think he's used them with you before about being on the 50-yard line but not having a headset, and that kind of thing.
A lot of football analogies.
A lot of football analogies. Yeah. People used to call his dad Coach. So anyway, he wants to distance himself from the current problems, and he very famously resigned from Governor Fallon's cabinet when she proposed extending the state sales tax to a bunch of services that are not currently taxed, and he said this is terrible for small business. I'm an advocate for small business. I'm off of this.
Yeah.
So
he had his first ad came out recently,
which doesn't mention his state experience.
It doesn't mention his state experience. What it does mention, it mentions his experience in the Secret Service,
right?
And something that we've actually talked a lot. I mean, there's actually a scene where he's walking through this laser scope, almost like I'm going to take a bullet for the state. I don't know what the bullet is. I don't know what the target represented, but it's really dramatic kind of him walking through the laser. Talks about Trump. I mean, it mentions him by name.
Very high favorability rating. You've written about the very high favorability ratings Trump has in this state.
And that's obviously not surprising for a lot of reasons. But you talk about Lamb is connected in state government. He's connected in Republican politics. I mean, his crew is probably pretty top notch when it comes to running Republican campaigns.
They are.
I mean, if any campaign is going to know or feel like they know what it takes to win a Republican primary, his campaign crew probably has the advantage right now.
That is a very key point. That is absolutely right. I mean, what you have to do is win the first round with the Republican primary electorate. And this group that he has, this consulting firm that he has, I think I was telling, they probably have the phone number of everybody who's going to vote in that primary and the runoff, and that's an even narrower group of people. As once you get into the runoff, participation drops off dramatically. It's really the hardcore voters who will turn out for that runoff. So he is targeting, and the word conservative. I didn't count the times that it would, but it's in there quite a bit. Conservative, Trump supporter. Law enforcement.
Well, and you talk. I mean, I think we've talked about this before in the show. I mean, right now, over the last several weeks, with the state legislature, there's been a lot of talk about increasing taxes to fill the budget hole, to fund teacher pay raises, and those kinds of things. Even though they weren't able to reach the 3/4 majority necessary, a majority of Republican lawmakers were in favor. It felt like a majority of Republican business leaders were in favor. Yet, almost all the candidates running for governor, with the exception of one, maybe two, and this includes Lamb and Cornett, did not come out in favor of these tax increases. So collectively as a state, while we've kind of gotten to a point where we're talking about maybe a willingness to raise taxes, even in a conservative state like Oklahoma, these candidates which are targeting the Republican primary have not gone that far.
No, you're right. That's another excellent point. I'm working on a piece about Gary Richardson, the Tulsa attorney, who's in the GOP field as well. And I was looking at my video from when he spoke at a forum in Crowder, and his line was something to the tune of, "We don't need more taxes to address our problems in this state," and he gets a huge round of applause. He was speaking to a meeting of the 2nd Congressional District Republicans that covers a huge swath of eastern Oklahoma, and that was the reaction to him saying that, and that's why you haven't seen, many in the Republican. You've only seen Gary Jones, really, the auditor inspector, come out and say, we do need new revenue, new recurring revenue. Here's my plan for it. He's the only one.
Yeah.
Does Jones suffer then from his moderation? I mean, running in a primary, you didn't put him in that top tier, despite the fact that he has won a statewide election.
Right.
Former Republican, and former Republican, state Republican Party chairman. I mean, is that the reason he's not in that top tier right now? Is his moderation on issues like taxes?
I think that that's more recent. I mean, I think that's not going to help him with the primary election. I think because he has almost no money. He's a terrible fundraiser. He was even as a, when he was chairman of the party. Fundraising is just not Gary Jones's thing. But he has but grassroots, appeals and organization is his thing. So I was talking to a guy in Payne County. When I was there one time, it was a Payne County GOP meeting, who said, we wouldn't even have this meeting if it weren't for Gary Jones, because he made it his mission when he was chairman to revitalize the county parties. So I think mainly it's money. It's also Gary Jones has kind of a, he's not good at sound bites. He's not real polished. He's not good at sound bites. You've talked to him many times, I think. He tends to get kind of, he knows so much that he gets kind of deep in the weeds and really,
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean,
it's tough.
Campaign managers will tell you just like the sound bites are
sound
what we
bites,
need.
keep it simple.
The thesis. So let's talk about Cornette. So we put him in the first tier, running with Lamb. We were talking about this earlier actually today. Cornette, is kind of running on this idea of, overseeing the renaissance of Oklahoma City, or being part of that tenure of overseeing that renaissance. He's kind of, I don't know that his name recognition nationally would be that high, but he's commonly been on the Sunday talk shows.
Right.
A lot of people like to ask him about being a mayor of a Republican town. He's a Republican that raised taxes and stuff like that. He's kind of come across as more of a moderate. When he entered the race, a lot of his supporters, or those that were attracted to him, pointed to the fact, like, listen, he's common sense, he's more of a moderate, he's pro-business, he's gonna, during this time of bickering and fighting and identity politics, he may be able to cut through that. But we were talking, how much has he shaped the race, or has the race shaped him? Because he's, you've written about this before on specific issues, like the president. I mean, there has been some things that he is, quite frankly, flip-flopped on, essentially.
Well, I think he was the head of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which is it's probably mostly Democrats, but it's a group that strives very hard to be bipartisan or even nonpartisan. They feel like city issues are not partisan issues. So he walked a line, I think, a lot as a member and a leader of the Conference of Mayors, not to sound like a Republican or a conservative Republican from Oklahoma, from a red state. Now he has to have an entirely different message. So he does sound a lot different when he's talking about Trump or when he's talking about guns or immigration or anything. He's going to sound a lot different than he did. The race is, to answer your question, you framed it perfectly. The race is shaping him, I think.
Well, and you wrote recently about, and you had a video showing things he was saying about Trump as a candidate right before the election. I mean, he didn't endorse him.
Far from it.
In fact, he was brought on national television, and for this very reason, probably, as a Republican, mayor, being asked, what do you think? What do you think about this field? What do you think about Trump, candidate Trump? And he was saying, I can't endorse him. I just can't
find a way to endorse him.
I can't get there. Well, now he has. And what's interesting about that is that no matter what you think of the president, what you thought about him before is probably what you think about him now. If you were, he has not been a president, I think, that has probably swayed your opinion much one way or the other. If you didn't like him before, you're probably not like, well, I actually kind of like. Maybe there's some examples of that, or vice versa. If you loved him, you probably are still pretty much a supporter. But as you're running for a Republican primary, you got to like Trump right now.
I had never seen. I'd probably seen him speak 5 or 6 times. Then we went to this forum that everybody was at in Eastern, except for Dan Fisher, in Eastern Oklahoma a couple weeks ago. And as part of his opening remarks, he talked about this game-changing election where he jumped out of bed the day after the election and called him up. Hey, I want to meet with you. And I was the first mayor to get into Trump Tower to meet with Trump, and this is a county where 78% of the county went 78% for Trump. I had not heard him speak about him in Oklahoma City. or other areas where I had seen Cornette speak, but you get into this county where it's so heavily pro-Trump, and it comes up.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's interesting about Trump is, I mean, Trump did not win the primary, the Oklahoma primary. So it wasn't that Oklahoma was just in the bag for Trump. But now, I mean, as a Republican, especially hardcore Republicans, I mean, Trump's your guy.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen, and I think Justin, you and I have talked about this. I mean, Republicans have embraced him, even if they were, reluctantly embracing him on election day. I mean, the party has now adopted him. I mean, he's the party leader as the president, obviously, and so. Even though Oklahoma may not have been waving the flag for Trump during the primaries, I mean, they have embraced him now. His approval rating remains, fairly high here in Oklahoma, one of the highest in the nation. So yeah, Cornette's probably, from a campaign perspective, it probably would be a little foolish to not be on the Trump wagon.
When you're a candidate, there are degrees of accepting Trump or promoting Trump or, siding with him. And many congressional candidates right now are not bringing him up, even Republicans. Yeah. Now, in Oklahoma, you get more of that than you do nationwide. But there are some Republicans who would rather not tie themselves to Trump. In Oklahoma, we are seeing, talking about the gubernatorial candidates, people who would usually focus on state issues are actually willing to look at the federal issues and side themselves or, tie themselves even to Trump. Talk about Todd Lamb and that ad being the most obvious case of that. But now even Mick Cornette, someone who's probably not a big proponent of Trump and hasn't been in the past, and is tying himself to that.
Is Mullen like the biggest Trump person in the delegation?
Mullen or Inhofe?
Markwayne Mullen,
I would say,
second district congressman.
Right, and you're just talking about the 2nd district in eastern Oklahoma. Used to be a solidly Democratic district, but certainly is not anymore. And Markwayne Mullen, probably of the House delegation from Oklahoma, is your strongest proponent of Trump, defender of Trump. And then probably Inhofe, certainly among the 2 senators, more so than Langford. Langford has made clear he has some disagreements with Trump's behavior, his words, his that sort of his way of acting, I guess.
His approach.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know how much Trump is going to be a part of the election in a Republican primary for governor. I think over the summer, obviously the midterm elections, I think he'll be pretty big. What kind of impact that has in Oklahoma, who knows? But on a national level, so I don't think it's going to be like the top 3 issues for voters going into the ballot box. But it definitely seems, as you said, Cornette, even though now he's kind of endorsing Trump, he doesn't seem to have as much comfort with it. So I thought it was really interesting that Lamb, he threw it down on the ad, and I almost wonder how much do you think Lamb is going to try to pull him this way? Like, your reluctant support for Trump, I'm going to embrace Trump. I mean, to try to now, he's driving him to the right on the president. I mean, and I think Lamb can do it with. I think he embraces Trump because he legitimately is a fan of the president or supports the president. Right. I have to imagine I imagine his team knows that and is going to try to draw him into that.
And I think that there will be some of the things that the mayor said about Trump in 2016 will find their way into ads before this primary is over with.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like
and the wall, remember? Yeah. I mean, I think his. I'm trying to think of the direct quote about that the mayor had about the wall, but I think it was like there's no need for it. The wall is unnecessary. Or something. It was along those lines. I can't believe that's not going to be used somewhere. Oklahoma is as you guys both know, very conservative on immortration. The Republican electorate in this state is very conservative on immigration.
Yeah, if you don't like Trump, I don't know that Cornette has done any. I mean, then you don't like what Cornette is saying on Trump because he has effectively endorsed him now. But if you do like Trump, I don't know that you still like what Cornette has said on it because he hasn't holistically endorsed it. And so it'll definitely be interesting to watch. I know you kind of mentioned Stitt as kind of, maybe in that upper tier a little bit, and maybe that has mostly to do with maybe his financial power. But which one of the kind of outsiders, so to speak, do you feel like if one of these outsiders was going to surprise and make it into the runoff, which one do you think has the best chance?
I think it would be Stitt, just because, as I said, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody knows who Gary Richardson is. He's the outside. He's the Tulsa attorney. But he did run before, and he ran as an independent. And I got into this in the story, and I'm going to get into it in the story I'm working on now. There's a big portion. There is a portion of the Republican primary electorate hardcore Republicans that remember 2002 and resent the heck out of Gary Richardson for running as an independent in that race. Gary Richardson was well known as a prosecutor in this state. You know, he prosecuted county commissioners, the biggest corruption scandal in Oklahoma history. And he's well known and well liked in Republican circles, a lot of them. You know, Reagan chose him. He was tight with Frank Keating. He ran as an independent against Largent, and he got a lot of votes. I mean, I don't have them in my head. And Largent lost by a very small amount of votes to Democrat Brad Henry. And there's just, I ran into a guy yesterday I hadn't seen in years, a Tulsa Republican, and I go, well, you know, what are you thinking about the, and he told me who he's for, and then I go, well, what do you think about Richardson? You know, you're from Tulsa. He goes, I'll never forgive him for running again. You know, I mean, there's that portion that still blames 8 years of Brad Henry on Gary Richardson. So I think that besides the fact that, you know, he's not a fresh face, and that he's got this resentment, this undercurrent with older Republicans, that Stitt is probably more appealing of the two outsiders.
Yeah.
At the risk of always coming back to Trump, do people like Stitt promote that idea that, you know, we have a businessman in the White House, we need a businessman, you know, in the governor's mansion, and that
the wealthy outsider thing? I mean, that's exactly what I mean, of course, Trump was so well known. You know, I mean, he's been part of you know, American culture really since the '70s, I think. You know, or clearly the '80s, and then, you know, through having his own TV show, but. And Stitt, nobody knows who he is. You know, he started this mortgage company in Tulsa. But I think of the two, like I said, I think because he doesn't have some of the baggage that Richardson has with the primary electorate, he might, I'd probably say that at least at this point, that more people are willing to give him a look.
Oklahoma is not a state with a long history of governors without political experience.
No.
David Walters, who most people don't look too fondly upon in his tenure, and then you have, I mean, Robert Kerr, who people do look pretty fondly upon as governor. And so you have a couple different examples there, but otherwise not a long history of businessmen or people from outside of elected office coming into
even Walters
office.
Even Walters was, I think at the time that he,
commission,
exactly. I think he was the head of the DHS commission when I was, you know, at the Human Services Commission when I was at the Capitol. I mean, he knew politics. He was part of it. I did a story about how active he was at OU in politics. So I mean, but Stitt is a real newcomer to politics. He is such a novice. And it shows a lot when he speaks.
Chris, tell me about this. This kind of concept you threw out when we were talking in the newsroom earlier today, that, you know, in Oklahoma, voters really like the nice guy candidate, the governor. Tell us a little bit about. Well,
I just think there's just such an obvious history of him, and I think the current governor is a really good example, and the person who won the Democratic nomination against her, Jerry Askins, very nice people. You know, that you just. You know, they're always smiling and they really don't say negative things about other people. And Brad Henry was pretty much the same way. I mean, very vanilla, you know, very, you know, kind of non-controversial, nice guy. And, you know, Keating was different. Frank Keating was willing to offend people. But, you know, George Nye, the governor and longtime lieutenant governor of the state, there's just, like I said, I can think of in my lifetime more examples of that sort of personality, you know, that very friendly, very Oklahoma personality, just nice, outgoing, you know, not confrontational, you know, not critical, not superior, you know, obviously condescending. They're just genuinely nice people. Yeah, and I think that's the way that Mick Cornett strikes a lot of people. I've been told that's how a lot of people view him. And, you know, after he gives a speech or something, they're very impressed by, you know, what a nice guy he is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and he is
a nice guy.
I mean, I think he is, and I don't use this as in a derogatory term. He's very polished too. I mean, he's a former sportscaster on television. Right. I think, you know, obviously he's still. In fact, you know, he had a documentary come out a few years ago that I'm trying to think what the name is. The Bust. Yeah, it kind of looked at the history of Oklahoma City and over the last kind of few decades. It's real interesting. It's long, but it's really interesting. I mean, if you're interested in Oklahoma City history, it's definitely worth a watch. I remember interviewing him after that, and I'm saying like, hey, you used to be a journalist. Did you feel like you kind of were scratching that itch again a little bit? He's like, well, I always continue to see myself as a journalist. I continue to see myself as a storyteller. And that's where I think, I haven't seen much of this. Now, you've been on the campaign trail, I haven't, so maybe you've seen some of this. And like I said, it seems like he's kind of, still kind of getting his feet grounded in this race. But where he's really been compelling is when he can kind of tell stories. I mean,
he does tell a lot of stories.
Tell stories about, but they're positive stories, right?
No, they are.
And talking about, and it's always like a kind of Lamb, his football analogies are probably right because he's probably more like the coach that can kind of, say, come on, guys, let's rally about it. And Cornette is more of the kind of soft approach, come on, guy. Just their tone is different, and I think it's going to be really interesting. So I think that kind of nice guy, nice gal, theory, I think that it works well for Cornette. Now, all the things that you said, and once again, I mean, that's not necessarily how Trump gets pegged, but once again, I mean, this wasn't a state that went with him out of the gate. I mean, this was a state that went with
Cruz and Rubio.
And then before that, I think it was Huckabee.
That's right.
So it's more of that kind of religious connection. So as we kind of wrap up here, I want to ask: is that playing at all? I mean, have the candidates at all, brought religion into this?
Yeah, I mean, they do. It's not dominant. It's not in any way a dominant thing, but they do talk about their faith. Almost all of them, will talk about their faith. I'm trying to think of who the most. I mean, I think maybe Todd Lamb, and I think with. Let's say, it would just be my impression from, a very limited time, with a bunch of the candidates, just a few times. He probably has the most appeal. If you're like a one-issue voter on abortion, I think you might gravitate toward Todd Lamb. But he doesn't, like I said, he doesn't make, I'm trying to think of the word that he used, the phrase he used one time that, it wasn't lived, like something like lives by the Bible or lives biblically. I mean, like I said, it's there in a lot of their comment. And
Fisher, especially, a pastor.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I am going to a rally that he's holding this weekend, so I hope to know more about him after that.
Fisher?
Yeah.
Fisher's the one that he has said. He is for an all-out ban of abortion. In fact, in some of the online ads that he's put out there. He's got an online ad that's it's like 20 minutes long. It's kind of interesting, but where he actually kind of goes after his other Republican, Fallon and other people who are running, saying they're not, they're still for abortion in some cases, and I'm not for it at all. And it's kind of even tried to cast out. I wonder how much. I'm not sure how relevant of an issue that is right now in Oklahoma. I mean, majority of Oklahoma voters are obviously pro-life voters.
Right,
I'm not sure how much that's going to rear its head, and I don't expect the Republican candidates to get into a debate about who's tougher
I
on
think
abortion.
you're right about that. I think there's a sophistication about that issue. I mean, basically all they want to know is that you are against it, but they obviously all, I think the majority of the electorate knows that this is a U.S. Supreme Court thing. You guys could fight about this at the state capitol for months, and it would still be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. We've got other fish to fry, so to speak. That you can't. We've got problems that can be solved at the state level. So I don't know how many people Fisher attracts with that message.
Yeah.
Are there any plans for a televised debate or anything going
Not
forward?
that I know of yet. I mean, there are a lot of forums scheduled. I mean, there's one next week in Durant, sponsored by the Oklahoma Academy, and there's, I think, a week after that or so, there's one in Tahlequah, but I haven't heard of any news organizations yet sponsoring a televised one. Yeah,
definitely would be fascinating. Well, obviously, I know we're focusing pretty much all of our conversation on the Republican field. I mean, that's the one that's probably the most interesting right now. Unknown how that'll go, and we'll continue to kind of talk about some of the other party races here in future episodes. But yeah, the Republican field right now is going to be interesting to watch as we try to, we're less than 4 months away, right?
Yeah.
June is the primary election, and then
About
runoff.
5 weeks away from filing, I think. Less than 6 weeks from filing, I think.
And then a likely runoff after that to be held a couple months later. So, well, Chris,
it's a year-long deal.
Yeah, well, we'll let you get back out on the trail. Although at some point, I mean, you're out on these small towns. At some point, though, I mean, the race is going to really kind of start to center in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, the media markets.
That's where it's going to be. Yeah, I think.
And that's where it's going to be decided. I mean, you win the 2 metros, it goes a long way to putting you over the top.
That's where you need money too.
That's where you need money. That's where it becomes a big part of it.
Critical. You need money for everything, but you especially need it there.
Yeah, for ads, ads in these markets. That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Political State. We'll be back again next week. Maybe we can get Dale Denwald out of the Capitol. We didn't even talk about state issues, but a lot going on. And follow Dale as bills start moving out of committee, and we're talking about next year's budget and what's going to happen there. With Chris and Justin, I'm Ben with the Oklahoman. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you again next week for another episode of Political State.